My stepsister started dating my ex and then made sure to parade him through every single family gathering like she had won some kind of prize. Now she wants to know why her invitations suddenly stopped coming. My mom married my stepdad when I was 16, and he had a daughter my age named Britt. From the very beginning, I genuinely tried with her. I shared my room with her on weekends, let her borrow my clothes, and even introduced her to my friends. She was never really warm back, but I always told myself she was just adjusting to the new family situation. By the time we got to college, we were civil but never close, and honestly, I had made peace with that. In my early 20s, I dated a guy named Nico for about 2 years. It got serious, and for a while I really thought we had a future together, but everything fell apart when I found messages between him and 3 different women that were completely inappropriate for someone in a relationship. I ended it right there. It hurt, but I forced myself to move on. About 4 months after we broke up, my mom called to tell me Britt was bringing a boyfriend to my stepdad's birthday dinner. I didn't think much of it until I showed up and saw her walking in with Nico, her arm locked tightly through his like she was presenting some kind of prize. She led him straight to my mom and stepdad and introduced him by his full name, even though he had been to our house so many times when we were together. My mom looked at me, my stepdad looked at me, Britt looked at me most of all, clearly waiting for a reaction. I gave her nothing. I simply said hi to Nico like I would to anyone else and sat down to eat. Throughout the entire dinner, Britt kept glancing at me, almost disappointed that I wasn't reacting the way she wanted. After dinner, she casually mentioned that she and Nico had been seeing each other for about 2 months, which meant she had started dating him less than 8 weeks after I ended things. My mom later pulled me aside and asked if I was okay. At the time, I told her I was fine and that Britt could date whoever she wanted. I honestly meant it then. What I didn't realize was that it wasn't really about Nico. It was about what Britt was doing with it. From then on, every family gathering became another opportunity for her to put on a show. Easter, 4th of July, Jake's baseball games, Sunday dinners, birthdays, every single event, Britt made sure Nico was there. She would sit on his lap directly across from me, kiss him right in the middle of conversations, and constantly bring up places they had gone together. Then she would turn to me with that fake sweet smile and say, "Oh, sorry, I forgot you two used to date." She said that line so many times it started sounding rehearsed. At my mom's birthday dinner, she told the whole table how they got together and even added that she had always thought he was cute even when he was with me, but of course she would never have done anything while we were still together, as if she deserved praise for waiting a few weeks. Nico went right along with it, putting his arm around her and looking at me every now and then like he was checking whether it still got under my skin. The truth was, it wasn't even about him anymore. What hurt was that Britt had turned family gatherings into something I dreaded. I finally told my mom how uncomfortable it was making me feel. She agreed that it was wrong, but then immediately said she didn't want to cause drama because things with my stepdad were going well. That sentence stayed with me because what it really meant was that my comfort came second to keeping the peace in her marriage. My stepdad spoke to Britt once, but she immediately twisted it, saying I was jealous and couldn't handle seeing Nico happy. She made herself out to be the victim and me the bitter ex, and just like that everyone backed off. Nobody wanted conflict, so nobody did anything. After a while, I got tired of walking into rooms that felt like traps. I stopped going. I missed Sunday dinners for nearly 3 months, skipped family events, and stayed away from everything. Then my mom called me crying after the 3rd missed dinner, saying she felt like she was losing me. That was when I realized Britt was slowly pushing me out of my own family, and I refused to let that happen. So I went back to the next dinner, but this time I brought Wes with me, one of my closest friends from college. Wes was loud, funny, and naturally easy to be around. Britt walked in with Nico and immediately started her usual routine, sitting too close to him and laughing too loudly, making sure every little touch was obvious. But this time, I gave her absolutely nothing. I spent the evening talking with Wes, joking with Jake, and actually enjoying myself for the first time in months. I could see the frustration building on Britt's face because her whole act only worked if I looked miserable. The next dinner, she tried even harder, telling everyone Nico had surprised her with flowers for their 6-month anniversary and then looking directly at me while saying he had never done that for anyone before. I simply smiled and said, "That's sweet," before turning back to my conversation. She had nowhere to go from there. At Thanksgiving, she escalated again, announcing that she and Nico were thinking about moving in together and then adding that it must be hard for me to hear since we had never made it that far. This time, my stepdad finally put his fork down and told her that was enough. My mom agreed. Even Jake, who was only 15 at the time, looked at her and said, "Why do you always have to be weird about it?" Britt immediately acted offended and accused everyone of ganging up on her just because she was in love. Nico, as usual, said absolutely nothing. He had become nothing more than a prop in Britt's need for attention. After Thanksgiving, my stepdad finally told Britt that Nico was no longer welcome at regular family events. After Thanksgiving, the very first Sunday dinner felt different in a way I hadn't experienced in almost a year. Britt showed up alone for once, and the empty chair beside her said more than anything else could. She kept glancing at it and sighing loudly every few minutes, clearly waiting for someone to ask what was wrong, but nobody did. Everyone just carried on eating and talking like normal. Jake was telling my mom about baseball practice. My stepdad was talking about work, and I was actually able to sit there without feeling tense for the first time in months. Eventually, Britt sighed one last dramatic sigh, stood up, and said she wasn't feeling well before leaving early. The second the door closed behind her, the entire room seemed to relax. It was honestly the most peaceful dinner we'd had in a long time, but that peace didn't last. At my cousin Julian's birthday party, a couple of weeks later, I passed by the kitchen and overheard Britt crying to my mom, saying it was unfair that she had to hide her relationship because I couldn't handle seeing her happy. Hearing that made my stomach drop because once again she had managed to twist the whole situation and make me look like the problem. That night, my mom called me and suggested family therapy. I remember sitting there in silence for a moment because it felt like somehow Britt had once again managed to turn her behavior into something I was expected to fix. The next day, I called my mom back and told her as calmly as I could that I was not the one who needed therapy for bringing my ex to every single family event. She went quiet in that way people do when they know you're right but don't want to admit it. A few weeks later, Jake pulled me aside after dinner and showed me his phone. Britt had been texting him constantly, asking whether I ever talked about her, whether I mentioned Nico, and what exactly I said about the whole situation. Jake told me he had been leaving her on red because it was starting to feel creepy, and honestly, hearing that from him made me realize just how much energy Britt was putting into keeping this drama alive. Christmas somehow made everything worse. Britt arrived with 3 friends I had never met before, and seated them around the table like backup support. Throughout dinner, she started talking loudly about how hard it was being excluded from family events and how some people just couldn't be happy for other people's joy. Then, right there at the table, she started crying actual tears while her friends comforted her. Half the room just sat there watching. Afterwards, one of my aunts pulled me aside, already convinced I was in the the wrong because Britt had gotten to her first with tears and a dramatic version of the story. I was so angry and humiliated that I left early and spent the rest of Christmas at Melanie's house, eating takeout and watching movies. Honestly, it was the best part of the holiday. 3 days later, Britt posted long paragraphs on social media about family members who couldn't be happy for other people's joy, tagging the location as my stepdad's house. The comments were full of people calling me petty and immature. I took screenshots of everything and blocked her on every platform. My mom called crying after she saw the post and asked if I would consider talking to Britt directly. I told her Britt didn't want peace. She wanted a reaction so she could play the victim even harder. Then came February, and Britt showed up to Sunday dinner with a ring on her finger, announcing that Nico had proposed on Valentine's Day. Just like that, every family gathering became about the engagement. She found ways to bring it up in every conversation, showing off the ring, talking about venues, colors, flowers, and how excited she was to finally marry the love of her life. Then, my stepdad pulled me aside one evening and carefully asked if maybe Nico could at least come to wedding-related events. I felt like I had been punched in the chest because even the one person who had finally started setting boundaries was already starting to cave. That was when I told my mom clearly that I would not attend any event where Nico was present, including the wedding, and if anyone tried to pressure me into it, I would step away from family events completely again. Then everything changed because Jake came to my apartment one afternoon straight from baseball practice, still in his uniform, and played me a recording from Sunday dinner. It was Britt's voice, clear as day, laughing about how perfectly her plan had worked. She was talking about how easy it had been to make me uncomfortable enough to stop coming around, bragging that she had manipulated everyone into seeing her as the victim because she was tired of sharing the spotlight. For the first time, I had proof that I wasn't imagining any of it. Jake told me he was sick of watching Britt get away with it and that he was going to play it for mom and my stepdad. I hugged him so tightly because at 16 he had shown more courage than most of the adults in our family. After that, I stopped waiting for anyone else to validate how I felt and started building a life that no longer revolved around Sunday dinners and family drama. Thursdays became dinner nights with Melanie and Wes. Saturdays became my pottery class, where I met people who knew nothing about Britt, Nico, or the chaos attached to them. Around the same time, I got promoted at work, and my manager even commented on how much more focused and happier I seemed. She was right. Without spending every weekend emotionally drained, I suddenly had energy for my own life again. Meanwhile, Britt was still trying to control the story. She sent a long group text to extended family explaining that some people would not be attending her wedding because of jealousy issues. Almost immediately, my phone started buzzing with disappointed relatives. Instead of defending myself over and over, I sent one clear message saying that I was happy for Britt but had chosen not to attend events where my ex was present, and I hoped everyone could respect that boundary. To my surprise, my mom backed me up completely. A few days later, she came to my apartment looking exhausted and told me she was sorry for not protecting me sooner. She admitted she had started therapy and that it had helped her realize she had been prioritizing keeping peace in her marriage over protecting me. Hearing her say that out loud meant more than I expected. I told her I needed her to stand up for me going forward, not just apologize after the damage had already been done, and she promised that she would. True to her word, she sent a message to my stepdad and Britt saying my boundaries were not up for debate. When Britt responded with paragraphs about how hurt she was, my mom finally replied that the real issue was the way Britt had behaved for months while everyone else had enabled it. Jake later told me that mom and my stepdad had one of the biggest fights he had ever heard, with my mom finally saying that Britt had deliberately weaponized family events to hurt me, and that my stepdad had allowed it because he didn't want to deal with his daughter's manipulation. For the first time, I felt seen. For the first time in a long while, I finally felt seen. Melanie asked me one evening why I kept feeling the need to defend myself to people who never even bothered to hear my side first. And honestly, she was right. Anyone who truly cared about me would have called and asked what really happened instead of immediately believing Britt's version just because she got there first with tears and drama. That was the moment something really shifted inside me. I stopped caring about convincing everyone. I stopped feeling guilty for protecting my peace. The wedding invitation eventually arrived in a thick cream envelope, and tucked inside was a handwritten note from Britt talking about olive branches and family healing. I read it once, let out a long breath, and then calmly checked will not attend. I still sent a polite card and a registry gift because I refused to give her anything she could twist into more drama. On the morning of the wedding, instead of sitting through an event that would only make me miserable, I went to the beach with Melanie and Wes. We played volleyball, ate sandwiches, laughed until our stomachs hurt, and even ran into the freezing water for fun. At one point, my mom sent me a photo from the venue, and I sent back a picture of the three of us at the beach. She replied with a heart and said, "This looks perfect." That one message told me everything I needed to know. 3 months later, everything had finally settled into a new rhythm. My life looked different, but in the best way possible. I had coffee dates with mom, pizza nights with Jake, and quiet dinners where we actually laughed about normal things instead of sitting through tension and fake smiles. My stepdad, Britt, and Nico had slowly moved into their own separate circle, and I was okay with that. We only really overlapped at major holidays, and even then I kept it short, usually staying for an hour before leaving. I was genuinely happy with the life I had built. My chosen family had become just as important as the one I was born into. Melanie and Wes had been there for me through every messy part of this, and Jake had become one of the people I trusted most. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty for choosing peace over forced family harmony, because honestly, harmony that depends on one person constantly making themselves smaller is not really harmony at all. It is just silence dressed up to look polite, and I was done shrinking myself for other people's comfort. My family looked different now, but it felt real, and that was enough for me. Looking back, the worst part was never even Nico. He was just a symbol of what Britt was trying to do. What hurt was realizing that she had turned family gatherings into a performance, and for a while everyone let her do it. She didn't just date my ex, she made sure to parade him through every dinner, every holiday, every birthday, as if the entire point was to make sure I saw them together. It was never about love. It was about attention. It was about winning some imaginary competition that only she was playing. and the second I stopped reacting, she had to keep escalating because the only thing feeding her was my discomfort. Once I stopped giving her that, the cracks in her behavior started showing for everyone else to see. Jake later told me that after the wedding, Britt was furious that I didn't attend because she had been expecting some kind of dramatic reaction or last-minute confrontation. Instead, I gave her nothing. No scene, no tears, no argument, just absence. And somehow that bothered her more than anything else ever could. A few weeks after the wedding, Mom invited me over for dinner with just her and Jake. No stepdad, no Britt, no Nico, just us. We sat around the kitchen table eating pizza, laughing about Jake's latest baseball game and talking about normal life. At one point, Mom looked at me and quietly said she was proud of me for holding my boundaries even when nobody else understood them at first. I won't lie, hearing that made my chest tighten a little because it was something I had needed to hear months ago. But still, hearing it now mattered. It felt like a small piece of healing. Over time, I learned that sometimes family doesn't go back to the way it was, and maybe that's okay. Sometimes things break and rearrange themselves into something different, something smaller but stronger. I stopped chasing the version of family I thought I was supposed to have and started appreciating the one I had now. The version where I felt respected. The version where I didn't have to walk into a room already bracing myself for someone's performance. The version where peace was real, not something I had to pay for with my own comfort. Britt still occasionally tried to stir things up. There were passive-aggressive social media posts every now and then, little comments passed through relatives, and stories about how some people still couldn't move on. But none of it touched me anymore, because by then, I had already moved on. Not just from Nico, but from the need to explain myself to people determined not to understand. The truth was simple. Britt had made family events unbearable on purpose. She used my ex like a prop to get a reaction and tried to push me out of my own family. The only difference now was that everyone else had finally seen it too. Funny enough, the invitations didn't exactly stop coming for Britt, but they definitely changed. My mom and Jake began hosting more dinners outside the house, smaller gatherings that naturally didn't include the stepfamily side. Holidays became split. One meal with Mom and Jake, another separate one with the others if I felt like showing up, and honestly that worked for me. Nobody had to force fake togetherness anymore. The pressure was gone. One night, Wes said something that stayed with me. He said, "Sometimes the best revenge is living well enough that their drama no longer reaches you." And he was right. My life felt full again. Work was going well, my friendships were stronger than ever, and I no longer spent every Sunday night emotionally drained. So if Britt was wondering why the invitations suddenly stopped feeling the same, maybe the answer was simple. People eventually get tired of someone turning every gathering into a stage. In the end, I didn't lose my family. I just stopped letting someone else decide what family had to look like.